welcome to TRT World, live from New York, ahead of the world's largest gathering of global leaders. We are here outside the United Nations headquarters. I'm Selena Downs.
And I'm Jaffer Hasnan. The United Nations General Assembly this year is centered around many crises, but at the heart of the conversations is Palestinian statehood, the massacres in Gaza, and Israeli actions in the region.
That's right. Since the Israeli onslaught on Gaza began, the global narrative has seen a drastic shift with nations that were once complicit now openly critical of Israeli actions, as Christina Shibich reports.
And my administration's support for Israel's security is rock solid and unwavering.
Israelis know they can do whatever they want, and no one is going to call them to account.
I want you to be sure that you are not left alone in this war.
In diesem Moment gibt es für Deutschland nur einen Platz, den Platz an der Seite Israels.
From London to South Africa and New York to Paris and Istanbul.
A fair future.
Protests in support of the people of Gaza erupted as the world watched Israel's attacks on the enclave unfold. But there was much pushback against these demonstrations, particularly in Western countries, where pro-Palestinian gatherings were in some cases banned and participants faced very real consequences.
The president of MIT, Sally Kornbluth, released a video basically telling the world that we had been suspended. She's, attempting to capitulate to the Zionist pressure.
As time went on and the death toll in Gaza climbed, the divide remained, despite leadership changes in places like the US.
The US will take over the Gaza Strip, the Riviera of the Middle East. This could be something.
I mean, people talk of ethnic cleansing. No, it's worse. It's worse. It's forced displacement.
Bring them all home before it's too late.
One thing remained constant. And even grew. People showing up to back Palestinians, putting pressure on those in power to reconsider their unwavering support for Israel.
We need look no further than the horror show in Gaza.
Famine now confirmed in Gaza, Governorate, the humanitarian consequences of ongoing hostilities, of displacement and of aid obstruction are even more devastating.
Oh, it's terrible what's occurring there, yeah. It's a terrible thing. People are very hungry.
The United Kingdom formally recognizes the State of Palestine.
Im Bericht beschriebenen Vorfälle sind außerordentlich besorgniserregend.
As the world screams in outrage over the violence in Gaza, political support for Israel is shifting.
The Commission finds it is genocide.
Christina Shibich, TRT World.
All right, well, let's get more on the issues that we are likely to see here at the United Nations headquarters here in the coming week. I'm joined by our guest, Trita Parsi, the co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute, which advocates for less militarized and a more cooperative foreign policy approach. Trita, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
TRT World. So we're seeing a lot of global outrage. Political support is shifting too. Do you think this will put pressure on the United Nations here this week?
It certainly will, because the pressure is coming from civil society. Populations around the world are objecting ferociously to the genocide that is taking place, and that is increasingly now being taken out on their own governments because of their inaction. So these governments are going to move in the direction of doing something. The question is, will it just be symbolic, or will it be concrete measures that actually will enable an end to the genocide, the establishment of a Palestinian state, and an end to this conflict? That remains to be seen, but the pressure is growing, and it's not just on Israel, it's on the governments that are not doing anything to stop Israel.
Okay, so As I understand, for Palestine to get full recognition at the United Nations, there needs to be a vote at the United Nations Security Council in order for Palestine to become a full UN member. And we all know what could happen over there. The US is a member of the UN Security Council. It has vetoed multiple resolutions on Gaza. Just last week, it vetoed a resolution on Gaza. And the fact that the Palestinian delegation is not here right now, the Palestinian president is not present at the United Nations General Assembly. So let me ask you, Frida, what do these recognitions actually mean when it comes to changing policies and shifting realities?
So they're not necessarily necessary to be able to change the policy. I agree with that. And I think to a certain extent, a lot of the emphasis on recognition of statehood may have misdirected energy that could have been used better elsewhere to more than anything else stop the genocide. But this is where we are right now. Having started this, it is crucial for statehood to be, Palestinian statehood to be recognized at this point. We have a major challenge in the United States because there's laws on the books that says that if statehood is recognized, if Palestine is brought in as a full member, then the US will stop funding the UN. And this has been a key threat that has been used to prevent this from happening. Nevertheless, I think what's going to happen this week is that more and more countries are going to come out and recognize. It will not necessarily lead to the UN fully bringing in Palestine, but with this past us, we can now start to focus on the real concrete measures to put an end to the genocide. And that requires real pressure on Israel.
And that's been the problem, hasn't it? In the past, there's been no actual deterrent.
Exactly. What you saw in the Oslo process had many, many different flaws. But one of the critical flaws was that there was no consequences for the Israelis to continue to expand settlements, occupying more rather than less land, and just constantly defer Palestinian statehood. Any new mechanism that is put in place, and this is one of the good things that I think is happening here with the initiative that France and Saudi Arabia have started, which was now adopted with 147 members voting in favor of it, it puts an end to Oslo, and it starts a different approach. And that approach is not fully perfect yet. It's moving in the right direction, but one of the critical things that it will need to add is to make sure that there are consequences and pressure on Israel if it does not comply with international law.
Very quickly, Frida, why now? Palestine declared its independence decades ago, but why now?
Because of the genocide. Because of everyone seeing on their mobile phones how people are being brutally, deliberately killed by the Israelis. And the inaction of all of these past decades has led to this moment.
All right, now we're going to get global reactions. We have correspondents across the world right now. Let's begin with Paris, where we have Peter Allen. Now, Peter, good to see you. So we are here at the United Nations right now, and as I understand, France, along with Saudi Arabia, will be holding a huge summit. And of course, France has taken this lead when it comes to this new wave of recognition. So, Peter, tell me, how is this playing out domestically, and what message is Paris trying to send to the international community?
Well, domestically, there is still, and there always has been, a huge pro-Palestinian movement here in France. People from all shapes and sizes and all backgrounds, they protest against what is happening in Gaza and indeed on the occupied West Bank. On Sunday, I attended a very large demonstration in Place de la République, a public square in the center of the city. Thousands of people showing their opposition, of course, to the Israeli genocide and also to decades of suppression of Palestine. So today is a hugely important time here in France. But just to show you the kind of division that still exists, I'm standing in front of Paris City Hall, and just a few minutes ago I saw a Palestine flag being lowered from a window, and immediately it was pulled in and taken away. There are still a lot of people in power, including in institutions like this, who are instinctively in support of Israel, despite its war crimes, despite its crimes against humanity, despite the provable genocide that is going on. There are plenty of people who still support it in its actions, and that is why so many other people here in France are so delighted to see a change in view from the French administration. Emmanuel Macron is due to speak any minute now, I think, from New York, and he is likely to say not just that it is a symbolic decision to recognize Palestine, but there may in fact be concrete measures to try and stop the slaughter and indeed bring about some kind of peace.
Yeah, absolutely. We are due to hear from the French President Emmanuel Macron shortly. Peter, thank you so much, live in Brussels for us there. Let's cross to London now and talk to Paul Hawkins. Paul, with the UK now formally recognising Palestine, we saw the Palestinian flag raised above what will be the Palestinian embassy there. What political pressures and debates are you seeing there, especially given Britain's historic ties to Israel?
Well, yeah, that's a great point, and that's why it matters so much that Britain is now recognising a Palestinian state, because really, this all began with the British and the Balfour Declaration in 1917, saying that a Jewish homeland had to be established in Palestine. So, you know, for Britain, this matters a lot more than most. The flag was raised earlier. It is a significant question. Is it just symbolism? Is it going to actually lead to anything different? I've come to Palestine House in central London this evening. This place has been here 4 years, celebrating Palestinian culture, history and activism. And to find out how people are feeling here, we can speak now to Abu, who's a Palestinian chef. Abu, first, thanks for joining us on TRT World, and Minouche as well. First of all, how are you feeling about this this recognition of Palestinian sovereignty?
The recognition itself is not the issue. The issue here is the recognition of what the Palestinian state that they're recognizing today is only on 20% of historical Palestine. That includes within it 750,000 Jewish Israeli settlers spread it all over the West Bank, connected with Jewish-only roads and military structure as well. The state that they're recognizing today does not leave any room for 9 million Palestinian refugees to come back to their original land. And let's not forget that Israel is a Zionist colonial project that need to be dismantled. And I think that the recognition that's coming around now, specifically by the British government, is a last attempt to save Israel from itself. Recognizing a Palestinian state on 20% of the land includes acknowledging, recognizing a system that we fight against that is built on preferring Jewish and ethnic group over other indigenous people of the land.
So, you're saying that the UK is enabling Israel to save it from itself. You're giving Keir Starmer some credit, a little bit of credit?
Not at all, not at all. As I said, you know, things where they're going right now, if you look at the Jewish settlements in the West Bank, if you look at what's happening in Gaza, the genocide and the starvation and the ethnic cleansing, I don't think that it's realistic right now to recognize any state on 20% of the land, specifically that the refugees has always been a pillar in the Palestinian issue, and recognizing a state of Palestine on 20% of the land is another way to legitimize Israel's conquest of 1948. The stolen land that the Zionist project conquered 80% of the land now will be recognized as the State of Israel, which includes the denial of Palestinian refugees to come to those cities where they were kicked out from 1948.
Okay. Thanks so much for speaking to us. We've got to leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Cheers. Abby there, a Palestinian chef. Lots of people here at Palestine House this evening talking about, discussing and processing that news. Some people welcoming it and others saying, is it going to make a difference?
That's Paul Hawkins live for us from London. Paul, thank you very much indeed. And now let's cross over to Brussels and bring in TRT World's Brian Carter. So, Brian, I think it's fair to say that Brussels is at the heart of European Union policy making. So tell me, how could these recognitions shape broader European action on Palestine?
Well, not much. As you know, the EU is not competent per se to recognize statehood. This is really a state prerogative. As you know, last week the EU called to review some of the trade agreements they have with Israel in reaction to what is happening in Gaza, but they still need the approval of majority of member states, which at this moment is still uncertain. So there's a clear divide here in the EU between some countries who are recognizing Palestine this week, like France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Portugal, and who will be joining the likes of Ireland and Spain, who have already recognized as Palestine. But on the other hand, you have major holdbacks such as Germany, Italy, Denmark, the Baltic states, who are against this recognition. And this recognition is clearly the result of increased and intense pressure from civil society all across Europe. We have seen dozens and dozens of demonstrations and call for boycotts against Israel. But some say that this recognition today, and it's another criticism that's added to what you've just heard, is perhaps a smokescreen, that governments will use this recognition to say essentially, look, we're actually doing something, but in the meantime, they continue trading with Israel. In some cases, they continue selling weapons to Israel. So this doesn't really change anything on the ground. And some countries, like Belgium, where I'm standing today, is recognizing Palestine in words only, because in practice, they will only recognize formally Palestine once they fulfill conditions such as the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza and the removal of Hamas from any position of power. And according to civil society groups, this is an added violence against Palestinians at a time when Israel is trying to erase them. This is an added violence because essentially they're asking Palestinians to do something on which they have no leverage. So as you see, this recognition clearly is welcomed by civil society, but they say that this is not enough, and this should be tied to clear sanctions against Israel.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. Brian Carter there live for us in Brussels. Let's go live now to Washington, D.C. Of course, the United States is Israel's staunchest ally. Craig Boswell is standing by with us. Craig, with Washington firm on its veto here at the United Nations, how is the U.S. responding to this mounting international pressure and so many of its allies now recognizing the state of Palestine? What does that mean for the United States and its role here at the UN?
Well, a couple of things on that. Just as you and I were beginning to talk, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, just came to the podium and gave a slight preview of what we're going to hear from Donald Trump Tuesday in his speech to the United Nations. He's going to talk about Donald Trump's view of the negative effects of globalist institutions. So there's kind of a hint of where he's going with his speech. As in terms of Palestinian recognition, there has been nothing but negative comments to this. But look, as more and more countries move against Israel and condemn Israel for its actions and its war on Gaza, the U.S. becomes more and more isolated on this issue. Trump, when he addresses the UN, is going to be at odds with more than half the bodies there, including key U.S. allies. I mean, we just saw U.S. President Donald Trump standing beside the British Prime Minister just last week on the second day of his state visit there, and they openly disagreed on this topic, and they were asked about this, and they said this is the one area where they have a disagreement. And Trump was asked, in fact, why don't, as the U.S. leader, with your position with Israel, why don't you exert your leverage over Israel and have them end this onslaught in Gaza? And Trump deferred immediately, as he has done on this issue, saying it's all about the hostages at this point. Now, on the Palestinian statehood issue and the recognition by more and more of these countries, we've heard from the State Department calling it performative, they say. They say it's just an act, and that what they want are their priorities: hostages returned, security for Israel, and peace and prosperity for the region, according to the Trump administration. So that's where they are, increasingly at odds with the will of the bodies around the world and countries around the world. And of course, Donald Trump will be meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu for the fourth time
now during this UN General Assembly. They'll be likely talking about what steps are going to be taken next. They'll be talking about U.S. support for Israel. And this is something to note here. The electorate, the people of the U.S., the support for Israel has kept declining and has declined. Now, only about 20%, 27%, I think, when one of the latest polls say they support Israel. 87% say they want an end to this war on Gaza. So the reason I bring that up is because that's important, as the electorate will go to the polls in November of next year for the midterm elections to bring in members of Congress who Donald Trump will need to keep exercising his particular policies. Back to you.
That's Craig Boswell live for us from Washington. Craig, thank you very much indeed.
Well, recognition of Palestinian statehood still leaves many doubts about the practical impact of such a declaration. The vast majority of UN member states already recognized Palestine, and as Israel's war on the Palestinians approaches its third year, international law and Security Council resolutions remain unenforced and symbolic. As Pina Nashasta reports.
Algeria was the first country to recognize Palestinian statehood in 1988, after Yasser Arafat declared an independent state with Jerusalem as its capital. After Israel's ongoing war on Gaza in 2023, more countries, including the UK, Portugal, Spain, Canada, Australia, and Norway have formally recognized Palestine. Today, it is recognized by 151 of the 193 UN member states, along with the Vatican, representing almost 80% of the international community. But several European nations, such as France, Malta, and Belgium, have announced plans to recognize Palestinian statehood at this year's United Nations General Assembly.
1947. The United Nations General Assembly passed Resolution 181, known as the Partition Plan. It proposed two states, one Jewish, one Arab. Jerusalem would be international. The plan was accepted by Jewish leaders and naturally rejected by Arab ones, and war followed. But here's the point. The resolution already recognized the legitimacy of a Palestinian Arab state. That was 77 years ago. Fast forward to 1967. After the Six-Day War, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 242. It called for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from territories occupied during the war and affirmed the right of every state in the region, including Palestine, to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries.
The Palestinian nation of peoples is in search of a state in which they can, towards which they can assert their rights of self-determination, their rights of their human rights, their rights of recognition, and all of the other host of rights that go with being a people who are a nation within a sovereign state.
Recognition is political theater. The legal framework for a Palestinian state exists. What's missing is enforcement. Israel continues to expand settlements, control borders, and reject key provisions of these resolutions. That's not a failure of recognition, it's a failure of compliance. And that's the crux of it. The issue isn't whether Palestine is recognized, it's whether Israel abides by the international laws that underpin that recognition. The Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits the transfer of an occupying power's civilian population into the territory it occupies. Yet, settlement expansion continues. The International Court of Justice, the UN Human Rights Council, and countless NGOs have documented violations, but enforcement mechanisms are weak. The UN can pass resolutions, but it cannot compel compliance without political will especially from major powers. The reality is fragmented enclaves, checkpoints, and restricted movement. Gaza, that has suffered a 2-year systematic destruction, remains under blockade. The occupied West Bank is riddled with settlements and military zones. Occupied East Jerusalem, intended as the capital of a future Palestinian state, is increasingly annexed. And yet, the international community continues to treat recognition as a milestone. The real milestone will be when international law is upheld and resolutions are enforced. Until then, recognition remains a headline. Bassam Bouneni, TRT World.
Welcome back. Trita Parsi, the co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute, is still with us on this day. A crucial day indeed, Trita, and we heard reactions from across the world, from Washington, from Brussels, from other cities, important cities where pro-Palestinian movements appear to be gaining a lot of momentum. But right now what we are seeing, and one thing that really stands out about this particular General Assembly, the 80th General Assembly, more and more Western countries are recognizing Palestine. We heard from the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Portugal yesterday. Is this because there is a major change in majority public opinion in those countries? And what we are seeing right now is an example of Western public opinion shaping Western policy.
I think that is a big portion of it. Public opinion in a lot of Western countries have long been sympathetic to the Palestinians, particularly as they have been genocided. Now, that has intensified, and this is putting a lot of pressure on Western government. They're out of sync with their own populations, and those populations can take it out on these governments in forthcoming elections. We actually saw that being one of the critical factors as to why Biden lost his election in 2024. But there's also, I think, another factor at play here, which is many of these countries have in various ways helped Israel. And if Israel is found guilty of genocide, which I think more and more governments are concluding it likely will be, that means that these governments will be also found complicit in genocide, and this will have legal and political consequences for them. So the question is, how do you now shift your position away from that? And I think this is the beginning phases of this.
And what about just so much of the condemnation and the criticism against Israel and this push for Palestinian statehood is coming from key Western allies, countries that were, previously supportive of Israel, largely complicit in Israeli attacks, now seem to be shifting away from their support. Do you think that that is significant, that a lot of the recognition of Palestinian statehood is coming from previous allies?
This is very significant. Now, of course, it requires that there is that follow-up. If it just ends up becoming a symbolic move, then that is a way for these governments to pretend that they're doing something in order to appease their public opinion without actually having changed policy in a way that actually has an impact. But if we assume that it is going to have the kind of follow-up that is necessary, what it shows then is that Israel is really moving towards becoming an international pariah, not just in the global south, not just in the Middle East, but also in the West. We already have seen signs of how the Israeli Prime Minister, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court, is embracing this, talking about how Israel is going to become a super Sparta. Essentially accepting and embracing this isolation, which is a remarkable shift for Israel. For so long, it was pointing to the fact that it had these relations with so many countries as a sign of its success. Now it is looking at its isolation as a sign of its success.
I almost want to say emboldened, even as the UN General Assembly gets underway. We're seeing Gaza being razed to the ground.
After decades of giving Israel a carte blanche, and it could do whatever it wanted, and the United States would protect it, and Europeans by various degrees were doing the same thing, we have now a country that appears to have lost the ability of changing course and is just constantly tripling down. Ultimately, this is obviously not just bad for the Palestinians. They're obviously the first victim of all of this. But this is undermining Israel itself.
Frida, we already spoke about it. Of course, more and more Western countries which were historically allied with Israel. They're now coming out in support of Palestine. What would it take for the United States to do the same? We all know that the majority public opinion in this country, of course, is also shifting. But when it comes to the White House, when it comes to Donald Trump, when it comes to his administration, they are keen on supporting Israeli actions in Gaza. In fact, about a few hours ago, I saw a report on Reuters that the U.S. is thinking about sanctioning the entirety of the International Criminal Court.
Yeah, I think what you have in the United States is a policy that is out of sync with much of the population, certainly with the younger population. But it is not out of sync with the donor class, which is having a tremendous amount of influence both in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party. We saw that very clearly during the 2024 elections and Biden's inability and unwillingness to shift gear, and how there was so much pressure for the DNC as a whole to stick to that line, and they lost entire young people. Out of the 19 million people who voted for Biden in 2020 but chose to stay home in 2024, people who were in favor of Biden but chose not to vote in 2024, the largest number of them, 29%, said that they stayed home because of Biden's policy on Gaza. This can also potentially be repeated on the Republican side, given how fast younger Republicans are shifting on this issue.
Srila Parsi, fascinating insights. Thanks very much for joining us here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate your insights. Now, more nations are backing Palestinian aspirations for an independent homeland. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is expected to renew calls for a two-state solution at this week's UN General Assembly. For decades, Ankara has been a strong supporter of Palestine and was among the first countries to recognize Palestine as a state. Here to World's Kubra Akkoch reports.
This year's UNGA carries an added weight, with some of Israel's friends pledging to recognize a Palestinian state.
The overwhelming majority.
French President Emmanuel Macron was first to announce his intention. That recognition is something Turkey's leader has long been advocating for, with the country among the first to acknowledge Palestinian statehood in 1988. Last year, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan began his UNGA speech greeting Palestinian representatives before dedicating more than half of his remarks to Gaza.
After a long struggle, we are proud to see the representative of our friendly and brotherly Palestine among UN member states. We hope this historic step marks the final turn on the road to secure a full UN membership. I call on the remaining states that have not yet recognized Palestine to join the right side of history and recognize the state of Palestine without delay.
President Erdogan is once again arriving in New York with a full agenda, bilateral meetings, a high-profile address to the General Assembly, and an emboldened push for a just and lasting peace in the region.
Even though a ceasefire in Gaza remains urgent, the deeper problem is Israel's occupation of the Palestinian lands. An independent, sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital and full territorial integrity based on the 1967 borders can no longer be postponed.
A familiar figure at UNGA, President Erdogan is expected to reiterate calls for reforms to the UN, especially the Security Council. A message he has pioneered since his landmark 2014 address, where he introduced the now famous phrase, "The world is bigger than five."
In Gaza, it is not only children who are dying, but the United Nations system itself. Truth is dying. The values the West claims to uphold are dying. Humanity's hope for a more just world is dying. United Nations Security Council, what are you waiting for to stop the genocide in Gaza, to end this cruelty, this barbarity?
Many will be watching to see if this year's debate, centered on Palestine's recognition, will translate into progress towards structural changes within the UN system. More than 140 countries already recognize a Palestinian state. But with the Western countries finally joining that bloc, the issue is once again at the forefront of global diplomacy. And Ankara is positioning itself as a key voice, pushing for concrete action. Kübra Akkoç, TRT World, New York.
All right, for more on this, let's bring in TRT World's diplomatic correspondent Hassan Abdullah. He joins me live from the Turkish capital, Ankara. Hassan, good to see you. So President Erdogan is here. He's actually in that Turkish house right behind us. And of course, today he has many diplomatic engagements. And tomorrow is the big day. That's when the Turkish president is going to be addressing the General Assembly. And right before coming here to New York, the Turkish president said that he's going to be the voice of Turkey, is going to be the voice of Palestine, because the Palestinian president is not present here right now. And when it comes to President Erdogan in Turkey, of course, President Erdogan has raised the plight of Palestinian people at many previous United Nations General Assembly. But Hassan, what do you think is different this time around when it comes to President Erdogan's presence here and President Erdogan's upcoming speech to the General Assembly?
Well, Jafar, I think the timing is crucial, and especially when you look at what's happening at the moment, especially in Gaza, and also the developments taking place around the West Bank. This has been a matter of concern for Turkey. President Erdogan, the Turkish government, they have been very vocal in this regard. And just before President Erdogan left Turkey, he made it very clear that Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories are going to be very high on the Turkish agenda. Of course, there are going to be other engagements as well, bilateral engagements, but the situation in Gaza and Palestinian territories is very high on the agenda. Now, of course, Turkey has been internationalizing this issue, particularly since October 2023. President Erdogan has used every international forum to raise the case for Gaza. He's been talking about the death toll in Gaza, more than 60,000 people, a very large number of them women and children who have been killed. He's been talking about the need for the international community to take concrete steps to, number one, reach a ceasefire in Gaza, and number two, to stop the illegal expansion of settlements in different parts of occupied Palestine. He's been very clear on that. And I think the Turkish government has been saying very clearly that its diplomatic efforts have been producing results, especially in the form of a number of Western countries now recognizing a state of Palestine. Ankara is saying that it's going to continue with these efforts. Of course, we can also talk about the historical record of Turkey when it comes to the Palestinian cause, not just lobbying for this cause and raising voice against injustices, but it's also been focused a lot on human development, especially in the health and education sectors, particularly when you talk about the Gaza Strip, a lot of work that Turkey has carried out there. So I think it's really this big picture that we need to look at, what Turkey has already done and what it plans to do. And certainly, given the current circumstances, I think Ankara's role is going to be quite pivotal.
Okay, Hassan, thank you. Hassan Abdullah live for us there in Ankara. We will, of course, bring you the Turkish president speaking here at the United Nations this week. But let's cross live to Manuel Rueda, who is in Bogota for us. Manuel, Latin America, so many countries have been hugely critical of Israel and very supportive of Palestinian statehood. What's been the reaction there regionally to what we're seeing play out this week at the United Nations?
Well, for many years, countries in Latin America have recognized Palestinian statehood. Currently, there's only one country, Panama, that doesn't recognize Palestinian statehood. The question, however, is what are they doing? What have they offered to do to put more pressure on Israel? Now, Colombia's president has kind of been at the forefront of that. He's been attempting to stop Colombian coal exports to Israel as a form of pressure. Israel uses Colombian coal for electricity generation. He stopped military purchases from Israel. And he's also tried to organize forums, discussing with other countries what else can be done. There was a forum in July here in Bogota where a handful of countries agreed to stop doing business with companies that might be profiting from the occupation of Palestine. However, in Latin America, these actions against Israel really depend on ideological lines. What you have in this region is left-wing governments such as Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia willing to take more action, willing to do more than just recognize Palestinian statehood. but conservative governments being more quiet in the issue and not really offering to do much more. For example, that's the case of Argentina. Among political groups in the Latin American left, they have always sympathized strongly with the struggle of the Palestinians against Israeli occupation. However, what some critics say is that these left-wing groups and the politicians who represent them have their efforts have lost force also because they haven't been critical of other occupations, such as the occupation of Russia in Ukraine.
That's Manuel Reuter, live for us from Bogota. Manuel, thank you very much indeed. And now let's bring in Tier 2 World's Shadia Edwards-Dashti. She joins me live from occupied East Jerusalem. Shadia, good to see you. So just last week, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he admitted that Israel is facing some form of international isolation. So with all these recognitions happening right now, Palestinian statehood recognition, how unprecedented is this moment for Israel, and what kind of implications it could have in the longer run for Tel Aviv?
Well, make no mistake, this is an incredibly historic, symbolic and poignant moment for the plight of the Palestinians, this international community chorus of recognizing Palestine as a state. However, it is somewhat falling on deaf ears in Israel. To date, Netanyahu has basically done as he pleases with his onslaught and genocide in Gaza, and so it comes as not much of a surprise then that all of this condemnation and recognizing Palestine as a state today is really falling on deaf ears. Essentially, Netanyahu is dismissing all of this as absurd, he says. He calls it a threat to Israeli existence, and he'll continue to plough on as he sees fit. As well, we've got the likes of the far right pretty much singing from the same hymn book. They're essentially saying that this will destroy any diplomatic chance of trying to release the hostages, going forward to say that it's not the business of the international community to decipher what they do in their own country. And so essentially that is the opinion of the Israeli political sphere. What's interesting is even opposition leader Yair Lapid is saying very much the same thing. Plus, the protest movement within Israel is basically agreeing with Netanyahu and co too, saying that it won't release the hostages whatsoever. The interesting part now is how Netanyahu will respond. Many people particularly concerned that it will also see further force within Gaza and the annexation of the occupied West Bank.
That's Shadia Edwards-Dashti, live for us from occupied East Jerusalem. Shadia, thank you very much indeed. Now, Selina, I think it's fair to say that Palestinians have inhabited these lands for thousands of years, and Palestine as a state existed well before 1948. Now that more countries are officially recognizing what's always been there, Palestinians are calling for the world to go beyond symbolic gestures.
Absolutely. Palestinians want to see concrete action on the ground, and over the next 5 days we'll bring you extensive coverage of all of the discussions and what goes on in and around the UN General Assembly here. Ashraf Shannon has this report.
The United Nations.
With overwhelming support, the UN General Assembly adopted the New York Declaration, calling for the recognition of a Palestinian state and the realization of the two-state solution. On the ground, 2 years into Israel's genocidal war, over 64,000 people have been killed and more than 160,000 wounded. Palestinians in Gaza continue to face relentless displacement, severe hunger, and widespread destruction, struggling every day to survive amid the ongoing devastation.
The real question now is how the world will translate this recognition of a Palestinian state into reality in Gaza and the West Bank. Following the UN's decision, the international community has a legal and moral duty to pressure Israel to evacuate Israeli settlers from the occupied West Bank, dismantle settlements and restore geographic link between Gaza and the West Bank.
In the occupied West Bank, clashes between unarmed Palestinians and Israeli forces persist relentlessly, with residents in cities and refugee camps constantly facing the threat of raids, arrests, and military operations.
We mourn the victims and weep for Gaza, which has been devastated, but the situation in the West Bank is not much better. In the camps and in northern districts like Nablus, Tulkarm and Jenin, there isn't a single piece of land without a checkpoint. Our people there suffer just as we do, if not even more.
Meanwhile, in Gaza, people question whether diplomatic gestures and declarations can truly change their daily reality.
Global sympathy is appreciated, but the real question is, do the states recognizing Palestine truly know what land they are recognizing while Israel continues to seize it? We welcome every recognition because the State of Palestine will inevitably exist. And as Abu Ammar once said, if anyone doesn't like it, let them drink from the Sea of Gaza.
While recognition at the UN marks a historic milestone, the real challenge lies ahead, turning international acknowledgement into tangible change for those living amid the destruction. For Palestinians in Gaza, international recognition offers hope, but without accountability and real change on the ground, they fear that hope will remain out of reach. Ashraf Shanan, TRT World, Gaza.